It's that you have to find a grounded way that works for you, where you feel like you're the one in control and you're using the technology to help what you want to do.
Today's conversation was an impromptu one at the 2019 International Society of Bassists Convention, but this is my favorite kind of conversation. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and I was set to interview Joel Braun, who is the new bass professor at the University of Texas at Austin. He's leaving Ball State and taking over that job where Da-Shun Zhang was for many years, and before him, David Newbert, all past podcast guests. And I've been meaning to have Joel on the podcast for a while. It was a great chance to connect. And as I went over to the D'Addario booth where I was doing interviews, I also ran into Jeremy Kurtz-Harris, another past podcast guest and principal bass of the San Diego Symphony. They were chatting. I invited them both to stay. And we talk about all kinds of topics, learning this age of distraction we live in, research and different methodologies about learning and memory and progress, and strategies for staying off of distraction devices like phones, much more. Ended up going in all sorts of interesting directions, and I totally loved this conversation. A quick shout out to our sponsors: D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, the Bass Violin Shop, Texas Hill Country Bass Collective, A440 Violin Shop, and Colstein Music. More on them later, but let's dig into this multifaceted, free-ranging conversation with Joel Braun and Jeremy Kurtz-Harris. Joel Braun.
Yes.
Jeremy Kurtz-Harris.
That's right.
Who I chatted with Jeremy on the podcast before. I've never chatted with Joel.
Yes,
and
I'm
Joel's
a first-timer.
Yeah, and we're here at ISB 2019, and you got a new job, my friend.
I do.
Talk about that.
Well, I'm very lucky and super excited. I'll be starting to teach at UT Austin in the fall. I start in August. So I've been teaching for the past 7 years at Ball State University in Indiana, and I've been super happy there. And actually, that's where Jeremy and I first met. I had him out to do to be the special guest for one of my bass days.
That's right.
Which was really awesome. So now I'm doing the move and going to Texas, and super happy about the program there. It's a really fantastic program, as you know. I'm sure you and all the listeners know that Da-Shun's been there for a while, and the school is super thriving, and you know, the city is super thriving, so it's a very exciting time.
Cool. I was in Austin for the first time in March. My wife was born in Austin, but we just took a trip. I was doing TMEA, the education conference in San Antonio, and then we actually caught an Uber to Austin. Someone actually was willing to take us. Could have been a bad Uber ride if they were weird, but they were very nice. Nice. So hung out in Austin and went and saw the campus and walked around, and yeah, great. Yeah, Da-Shun's done great things there, and
yep.
And what a cool move. How long were you at Ball State?
I started in 2012.
Uh-huh.
So I think that's 7 years.
Something like
Have
that.
I finished 7 years?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeremy's back. I've seemed to see you every few months. I think I saw you.
Yeah, we check in.
Yeah, I think I saw you last at Andres' event in Tijuana. Maybe I saw you between then.
Probably.
Now. I don't remember, though.
Yeah, we catch up when we can.
And we were hanging out a little bit when you were in San Francisco or in the Bay Area.
Right, that's right. When you moved there and started your whole all your activities.
All my activities.
Then.
Exactly.
That was so it's been great to see everything you've been doing with the podcast and all those things expanding. So,
and I think when we chatted for the podcast was when I had my lowest fidelity audio conceivable. Let me tell you how I recorded that podcast. That was like, I think it was near when I was getting ready to quit. I had gotten a full-time job, so I was like overly busy. So I was actually taking a Zoom H2, this device, and I would put my cell phone on speakerphone, and I would put the cell phone by the mic, and I would talk on the other side of the mic. So it's literally like an audio capture of the speakerphone of my cell phone.
But
now,
you made it work.
Yes, but that does not do justice to the people. I think I recorded Jeff Braddock that way too, so it was not.
Right.
But it's good to have you in full fidelity.
Nice. all frequencies. Well, so one thing I don't know if you realize. So I was chairing the solo competition this year, but one of the tough things, or one of the challenges, is you get all these entrants. So we had 37 entries from 10 different countries, and it's sort of up to the chair to pick those. But this time I enlisted Joel to help listen through the whole batch. So I think it was really informative and sort of inspiring for both of us to get to listen to that many young bass players doing some really cool things.
Yeah, it was really cool. Thank you again for inviting me to do that with you. It was really kind of a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's all the applicants are blind. We don't know who anyone is. They're just numbers.
Yeah.
And we really just went through and listened to all the recordings. There was a lot of variety in terms of repertoire.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Really high level. It was just a really fascinating experience. Also because, they're not sending, because it has to be blind, they're not sending video. It's just pure audio.
Mm-hmm.
So it really kind of changes your perception, right?
Yeah,
when you're really just focused on the sound of the playing and not necessarily the visuals of a performance.
Mm-hmm. And we continued that through the next round too. For the semifinal round, we kept it screened, which I know was sort of not standard for solo competitions, but with my experience doing that with orchestral auditions, I've seen some distinct differences of how people listen when they're just doing it orally, and that's the information they're getting. Because once you're watching somebody, your visual side of your brain takes over.
Right.
I think there's some fact like it takes like 80% of your brain processing
I've
power.
heard that there have been studies done that do like a blind study or something like that, where a group of people will watch a video with no sound. Or only listen to a recording of the same performance. And I think they always choose the video that has the most kind of flair, regardless of any sound or anything like that.
Right.
There's some studies done that are
so it was interesting to do that for at least for the judges to have their first impression, because I wasn't voting once we got to the semifinals, and I got comments from several people that they felt that was really ear-opening in a sense to just get to focus on the sound. Mm-hmm. But the tricky thing, though, I don't know, I'm sure both of you have probably played auditions behind a screen before. Sometimes it's sort of hard to connect the music, though, when you don't have somebody that you're shooting towards.
That's very true.
At least I've experienced that before. So our balance was that we took the screen down for the finals, so at least then they could feel like they could open up into the hall and really project. It's always a balancing act, but I'm just sort of. It's sort of a fascinating conundrum to me.
Well, my opinion is that, competitions are performances.
Yeah.
Especially like a solo competition, right?
Right.
Which is distinct from an orchestral audition.
Exactly.
So a solo competition obviously is more of a performance, or you can feel like it's more of a natural performance than an orchestral audition, which seems very strange, to put it mildly. But even in that circumstance, to just even performing in front of a audience without the screen, it still feels distinct from like a recital that you may do, or a performance with an orchestra. There's always some sort of distinct difference if you're in that kind of competition mode. Yeah. Right? So it is interesting about doing a solo competition with a screen. And actually, I think that the recent Bottesini competition in Italy, I think they did a first round with the screen too. And then they took it down for a semifinal.
So. I remember when I did the competition way back in '97, when I was 2 years old. No, I was 19. And I remember the judges in that case just turned and faced the back wall because they didn't have a screen. And that was actually more weird.
Yeah, that is a strange.
I'd rather
Playing
just play for
the back of a head.
For the screen. But anyway, it's always a balancing act, and I think it is for orchestra auditions too. Yep. I mean, different orchestras choose different outcomes.
How are those two similar, having listened to both, like orchestral audition? Because in a sense, they are both a competition, right? But they're, like you were saying, Joel, they're different beasts too, right?
They are.
Yeah.
I think the biggest difference is the repertoire is completely the same for an orchestral audition. Everyone's playing the exact same snippets, and then you have a lot more to just compare back to back. With solo competition, almost half of it is the program that you pick, what you present of yourself, or how you're presenting yourself as a performer. Some people have joked about what if we had more free choices for orchestra auditions, and in some ways that would be tricky, but there's an element to that would be sort of fascinating. If you get to do one free choice excerpt, you get to pick what's what you feel represents you the best.
That's a good, because you would bring out people's personalities and preferences, and actually that would be that's an interesting concept.
I mean, at least I tend to think that the committee wants to hear a player at their best. I mean, that's what you're sitting there listening, and you want to hear some music. You want to hear performance. So I keep wondering, how can we encourage that in audition settings?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've both, I know, done solo competitions, because I was at the Bradford competition.
Yes.
I know you've done. You and I were sitting around for like an hour.
That's right. We were hanging out,
just talking. It was great. We should have recorded that.
That's fine. We can do it again.
But so you've both prepared for competition for orchestra audition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming.
Yes,
I know you stayed with Levinson for a long time.
I did many orchestral auditions. I've won some, got into the finals for some. Not done a single thing for many.
That's most of
your life for everyone, right?
So, how preparation process for a competition and an orchestra audition? Similarities and differences?
Well, I would have to say in my let's take the Braditich competition. That was kind of my way of how to say it. Make life difficult for myself. I decided that knew I was going to be awarded tenure at Ball State that year, and I said, well, as a way to celebrate for myself, I'm under the age limit. I still could do it. I'm going to do that as a way to reward myself for a job well done, and then I have to practice for So,
it's like a chance for growth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One of the things that Levinson told me when I was studying with him that I will never forget is he said, Joel, this is the essence of being a musician and of being alive. You improve some more, you try to improve again, and then you'll die.
Well, dark, but well put.
But basically what I took away from that was you just never stop improving. You never stop trying to be better. And eventually, you won't have to worry about it anymore. But until that point comes, always try to get better. So, I had the job. I had I think at that time, a 4-year-old or 3-year-old son, a wife, other stuff I have to do. So fitting in all the practice to get all that repertoire was difficult.
Yeah, and you probably got to structure your time differently.
Yeah, that was
when you got the family obligations.
Exactly. I mean, I remember when I was in school, I would just throw myself in a practice room and stay there for hours at a time.
Because you can.
Because I can.
Yeah, right.
For this, I think I had 2 hours a day maximum that I could actually focus and practice. So I had to decide how am I actually going to maximize those 2 hours. So I ended up getting a app where every time I started to practice a piece, I clicked on the piece that I had programmed in on the app. Mm-hmm. Every time I stopped practicing it, I clicked so I could see exactly how many minutes I was practicing each piece every week.
Wow, yeah. You just have to be organized.
I tried to be super organized because I knew that, my time was limited and I had this that I had to do. But I feel like it, I really feel like I've continued to grow, and that really helped me grow as a musician, even despite kind of being a professional already. That really was a super amazing experience for me to do and to have to prepare for that. So
I'm sure practicing has changed a lot for you, Jeremy. You got family, kids, and I remember you and I did the Spoleto USA Festival, maybe 2001 or 2 or something like that.
It was 2001, yeah.
Okay, so that was a while ago. Maybe around then, and that was before you got your current job in San Diego Symphony, and obviously you do many things, and you've done many things. Practicing, I'm sure, has changed a lot for you over the years.
Definitely.
I would expect.
Yeah. Well, especially the kids element.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you talk to any bass player or any musician who has kids, and we all just have that knowing.
Yeah, that always seems to laugh when I bring it up.
Because before, when you have projects, suddenly you can go into high gear mode and you can just block off times. But if there's people who, you're a big part of their life, you can't suddenly just disappear, at least without finding some backup planning.
That's right. Yeah, when you're I just played my recital here. So
literally,
I just played it.
You came in and sat down. You're like, I just got done. Yeah.
So I played the Gubai Duina 8 studies.
Whoa!
So when you're practicing Gubai Duina and your son comes in and says, "Dad, it's too loud," you just gotta deal with that.
Do you take that as a compliment though on that particular piece?
Maybe it depends on.
That's awesome.
But I think what you were saying before, once you get into situations like that, when you have multiple, draws on your attention, you have to be very focused.
Right. That's
and
true.
Unfortunately, we're not in the league where we get our personal trainers.
Right.
When if you're doing an audition or recital, you don't have a person watching your time. You don't have somebody helping you with your nutrition, and then somebody else on the team.
Which is a good point because you do in a sports context,
right?
If you're preparing for the Olympics or something like that, which you kind of are preparing for an event like that in a competition setting or in an audition setting. But you don't have that external network of pros, walking through, watch the playback tape. Oh no, look at that, look at this.
Right.
Get to the weight room,
Maybe your next step should be to develop a Fitbit for bass.
Are you ever curious just what kind of production capacity a company like Upton Bass has? Here's Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on how many basses they're turning out every year.
How many instruments to date in America, Togwonk, Business Park, Mystic here, entirely in the U.S., do we approximately?
Just completely ourselves?
Yes.
I think probably up over 1,600 now.
Yeah.
Okay,
coming up around 1,700.
Okay.
Yeah.
The evolution of the product line over these almost 1,700 basses at this point is so cool. From the Gary Carr model to the Bohemian and Bostonian and all the other things that they do at Upton. I just really enjoy their instruments, and I have for years and years. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Upton, and check them out online at uptonbass.com. Buying an instrument or bow is a major decision, especially the first time a student's looking for an instrument. Here's A440 Violin Shop's Michael Spadero on what he advises.
We usually start with an approximate price range, and we'll show them anything within that price range, and then to give them a little bit of context, I'll often show them instruments that are more or less expensive than that. But I say to play as many instruments or bows as possible before you buy.
Whether you're looking for a new instrument or a new bow or that next step in your journey, A440 Violin Shop has got you covered. Look for them online at a440violinshop.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They recognize that traveling and flying with the bass can be a serious obstacle. That's why they now offer several options for the jet-setting bassist. Either rent their removable neck bass for a no-hassle, convenient way to take a bass in a small package, or convert your bass to a removable neck and never be without your companion for those important performances. Purchase their Lemur Music Liberty Bell Flyaway. This package includes an airline-friendly custom travel case, and in minutes you can disassemble the bass and you're ready to go. Contact them to chat about options and find the one that best fits you. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
Well, let me tell you, the thing I have found, people are probably super sick of hearing me talk about this app because I bring it up all the time, but have you either of you checked out this app Modacity?
I've heard you talking about it on the podcast.
Okay. It's really cool. Like what it does I won't go at length about Modacity, but it's made me practice more and more efficiently. And I have I've only got 20 minutes playlists in Modacity. And it's like, I only got 20 minutes. And I don't have to think about what to do because I've already thought about it at another time during my day. Just get out the bass, boom, do it. And it encourages you to record yourself. It tracks your stats over time so you can see what you've been working at. It highly suggests you give yourself feedback. It's real quick. And so that there's no Fitbit yet, but that's
that's kind of what I did, only I had like 7 different apps that I was keeping track of.
Do you remember what you used?
Well, I used... What did I use? Hold on. I have my phone right here. I used A Tracker was the app that I used to keep like track of like the timing of everything I was practicing every week. I did. Have you guys heard about what is it called? The tomato, I think it's called the
Pomodoro.
The Pomodoro method.
I use Pomodoros.
Have you done that?
I do Pomodoros. I'll interject super quick. I use Pomodoros for my non-bass playing related work. I do 5 hours worth of Pomodoros a day. So it's just very simple. It's a 25-minute timer, and then get up and take a break. Right?
Exactly.
You
so
use
I
that?
was doing. Yep.
Okay, cool.
I was doing that. I was trying to do every trick I could find. Have you seen? It's a MOOC. It's on Coursera, but it's called Learning How to Learn.
No, but I'll check it out.
No,
check it out. I read about it in the New York Times article, and it's essentially this woman who started out her career as a Russian language specialist. She was trained by the armed forces, and then decided that she was not employed as not employable in the way that she wanted to be as a language specialist. So she went and got her engineering degree. And she had always hated math. Anyway, so she wrote this book called Learning How to Learn, and then they did a MOOC about it, and it's basically applicable for anything. It's applicable for like kids studying in school, if you want to learn a language, practicing. But I highly recommend it.
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of tricks that are in there that really I found helped me, especially now, where I have a limited amount of practice time, to kind of maximize that.
Right. Well, I have one question for the two of you, though. So I've always had a very mixed feeling about actually having my phone out anywhere near the practice session, because I've heard studies where I think kids who have it even in their pocket turned off in school concentrate a lot less.
Yes.
I know for me, if it's there and not even if it's in airplane mode, I just think about, I need to call this person. Or as soon as I start playing my first 3 notes, my brain clears out enough to remember all the 5 things I need to do. So how do you still find it's helpful to
I'm struggling with that. I must admit, I do sometimes like pause my practice session and like write stuff down that I was like, so I go through that exact same thing.
But you manage to avoid, like, if a message comes up and goes ding.
I try to put it in do not disturb mode.
Okay. So that's one of your
I try
rules.
to do that for my iPad too, because I use Fourscore on my iPad, and I've got Modacity on the stand. They're both on the stand next to me, and that's just, I'm so used to it. And I have parallel playlists built in both. I have like a set list for what I'm going to work on, and then I have a parallel playlist in Modacity. And so I just, like, with 2 fingers, one on each hand, I get them going. And if I have the do not disturb on, I don't think I get much coming through. So,
but even though that there's a phone there, or that it doesn't sort of put your brain into a different gear.
I think it probably does to an extent, but I think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. Probably in an ideal world, I would have like an iPod that's not on the internet or something, you know, but I just haven't gotten there yet. But that's an excellent point. And in this day of constant distraction, I've read studies that even if you just, you know how we sit down or we go out for food or a drink or something, we'll all take and we put our phone on the table.
Exactly.
There's like I don't remember what, but you're immediately more distracted just by the sight of that phone. Right. I read that, and I've been trying to always keep my phone like not on the table.
Right. Joel, how did you deal with that? Was it an issue or?
I kind of agree with Jason that it's something you kind of have to struggle with. And actually, I am a bit of a Luddite. I have an iPhone, but I've only had it for maybe 3 years. I think I got it like the year of the Bradatich competition.
Okay.
Because my wife made me. She said, if you're going to be doing all this traveling and stuff with our son, then you need to have an iPhone. Yeah. We need to be able to do stuff. But I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram. I don't have any of this stuff. So in that respect, I don't have those types of distractions.
Got it.
You know,
just like you haven't trained yourself to be tethered to every notification.
But I do still. I feel like I'm tethered to it nonetheless. I mean, in a way, I feel like, for instance, like my students are, you know, they call them like digital natives, right? Like they don't know any different,
right?
But I remember before, like when my family and I had to do car trips, I remember like tying a flag to our antenna that cars had back then, so that you can see the caravan on the road, and then you decide, we're gonna rendezvous at that gas station at exit 234 or whatever. Yeah. Right. Now it's just like, okay, I'll call you. Right.
Or like GPS, how it's. Do you remember, Jeremy, you grew up in the DC area, do you remember the gazetteers, these giant maps of like the metro area?
Oh, yeah.
And you'd find, it was like, I need to find 3A is where,
Yes.
like, and I had that for Chicago. And like,
I had one for Los Angeles when I lived there. That was a giant book.
Right. And like how, that and kind of training yourself to respond to every notification. That's such a
Yeah,
dangerous.
I turn off every notification. So
Right.
my the email that I have on my phone, the notifications are turned off.
I mean, that all makes sense
stuff.
to me. I guess I'm thinking dually because for us, it's one thing because we have lived without these things at one point. But, and this is probably a whole nother podcast on its own, but how do you encourage your students to create sort of mental space in their lives where they really can sit and concentrate in a way that it seems like we just do less and less. Because classical music, for me, what's important about it is in a concert, you create a space or you create a situation where people are really in the moment, but can think over a long period of time. And I feel like everything that iPhones are doing in general or smartphones are completely in the opposite direction of what we're trying to get across in classical music.
Yeah.
So
I totally agree.
I don't know what to do about that, but I keep wondering how can we encourage people to even just to listen in an undistracted way.
Yeah, I was thinking about a very similar thing just yesterday, maybe, about how with YouTube now, like my students, even when I was in college, like I graduated my undergrad in 2005.
Yeah,
we still didn't like get a new piece and then immediately look it up on YouTube to see someone playing it.
Right.
But now that's the first instinct. That's the first you can just go, and most of the performances that students are hearing now are online.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about this and thinking about how, for me personally now, like it's such a boon. Like it's there's so much good out of that because there's so much more material that you can become aware of that maybe you wouldn't have been earlier.
Right. You can
different,
stay connected to a much wider musical world.
And so much different styles of playing or different concepts that can really enrich you. But at the same time, I felt like that has made live performance so much more like meaningful for me. There's a difference between seeing a video of a live performance and then actually being in, which, could be, cut and paste or whatever, or being in the moment and seeing, like, having that experience. Right. I feel like in that respect, there's kind of a thirst in general for non-digital modes of, right?
Yeah. I so appreciate going. My wife and I have become, I never thought this would happen, we've become like San Francisco Symphony semi-regular attendees.
Nice.
Back when I was freelancing or whatever, I never went to see concerts. I always just had stuff. But I really appreciate the chance to sit down for 2 hours.
Right.
And I try to not pull that stinking phone out. I don't know in terms of advice for students, but I definitely have advice I've been trying to teach myself or train myself. And one thing is don't dip into, to me, email is the world's to-do list for you. You open up, it's everybody's request of you.
Right.
Social media has benefits for the things I do and probably benefits for everybody, but it's also the ultimate just cesspool of distraction and everything.
Yes.
So I wake up and I allow myself to listen to podcasts and I allow myself to read a book, but not check anything. And so I can listen to podcasts and I can read an actual book. And until 10 a.m., that's all I can do.
Okay.
And I usually go to the gym and I do try to get some actual work done on something. So that could be practicing or it could be writing or it could be whatever. Then at 10, I dip in and I give myself one Pomodoro, 25 minutes. And that's all I get. And by limiting that, it's amazing how I'm just delete. I'm not going to check that or whatever. Oh, chaos is happening on Facebook and something, but no time. Then I go back. And then in the afternoon, I give myself more time for those things because my good hours for me, I don't know about you guys, but my good hours are the AM.
Exactly.
Yep.
For you, both of you?
Definitely.
Yeah, but then you also start your brain out on almost like a different wavelength. You're grounded. You are proactively choosing what you're doing rather than being in respond mode.
And then at the end of the yes, exactly. And then at the end of the day, and this is more of a recent thing, I try to also like shut that stuff down. Like no more checky check of stuff. I'll watch. My wife will come home. We'll make dinner. I'll watch. I don't have kids, so I have a different lifestyle. But we'll watch some movies on Netflix or whatever we're watching. Sometimes we'll take a walk. But that seemed to work for me. So I have like a couple of times a day I check stuff. And I know for what I do, I mean, I have to. We all have to. And for those notifications, like Joel was saying, I let my phone, unless it's totally new, do not disturb, I let texts come in because not that many people actually text me. It's only people I really know.
Right.
And I let phone calls come in. Mm-hmm. And but no other notification is on my phone. So different from my wife. I pick up my wife's phone and I want to drop it. It's like every app is red. Like the email says like 1,750 messages or something.
Right.
Like, dang. Sorry, Courtney.
That's better than mine.
Throwing under the bus on this podcast.
But that makes sense that you have to find a grounded way that works for you, where you feel like you're the one in control and you're using the technology to help what you want to do, rather than just starting to be the other way around.
Because what Joel was saying, like this is also new. Like how long have these smartphones even been around? What was it? When did the iPhone come out? Like 2007, maybe?
Yeah,
somewhere around there.
Seriously, 10 years probably.
Yeah, 10 years. So think how much. I don't know about you guys, but certainly for me, how much I rely on this rectangle in my pocket.
Yeah.
Right.
Like runs my life. It's how I get places with Uber. It's how I like hold all my payment and my plane tickets and all the information on Evernote. Like my entire life is on this thing, my calendar, you know.
Have you ever misplaced it or felt like you lost it?
I'm really, really anal about it. So
Okay,
I haven't.
But it's one of the worst feelings.
Yeah.
If you think you've lost your phone, it's just like the most anxiety, which is really terrible.
I wish this were on video right now so you could see Jason's face.
I know.
Consider that question.
I'm
Petrified.
contemplating the thought of
Exactly.
but like something that's only been around for 10 years that we can so wholly rely on.
Right. Yeah,
that
it's scary.
technology, right?
It's scary.
I know.
I mean, my interpretation is that, like any human technology, right, it's really how it's used, right? So technology in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Any technology can either be used for good or for bad, or for in between.
Right.
So it's really up to like us to, like we've been saying, like check in like with ourselves. Like, is this phone, like, is the phone causing me like issues? Is it like disrupting my practice time or whatever? Or am I able to use it to actually improve what I'm doing for my practice or whatever I'm doing else?
That's one of what we're doing right here, the three is, this is to me an example of a good use of technology, because to have a conversation, just sit down and have a conversation where you're actually talking about trying to engage with each other, you know, I find that beautiful. And in our age of distraction, in addition to going to concerts or other events, I find that great. And then just in my own life, that's one thing I love about podcasts, which I see is real different than something like YouTube. It sends me down the vortex of distraction. Like I click away. But with a podcast, for me, I get lost in the conversation. You're hearing these people, and it's almost like I'm there in the room with them. And so I find that to be I find that to be a positive media in my own life. Whereas anything on YouTube, people often say, like, you got to put these things out on YouTube. And it's like, yeah, you're right in a sense, but I'm not going to watch like a 45-minute conversation on YouTube. I'm going to watch 30 seconds and click away to the next recommended video of whatever.
Well, I think the other thing about the podcast, I listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff too, because, you know, I'm a bass player, so I'm driving to gigs and driving here and there a lot. So I get a lot of time to listen to things in the car, but or traveling when I'm on the plane. But I feel like with podcasts, it also, because it's not a visual medium, right, that people are so inclined to just immediately go to the visual, like what we were saying earlier about the competitions, that when you're forced to turn your eyes off and really open up your ears, even if it's just listening to a conversation, it changes the way you think, right?
It absolutely does. Yeah, and that's a good point, that visual versus, you know, when I was high school orchestra director, I had such a long commute that I decided once, what if I record a couple rehearsals and listen to them back in the car ride home? And I quickly got into the habit of recording every minute of teaching throughout the day. Now, the depressing thing is, I would listen back to all of that on my commute home, and I still wouldn't be home. So I had lived my entire work day twice, and still at home. So that's food for thought. But I found that so valuable listening to the audio of the rehearsals and not the video, because you see all the chaos of the rehearsal and whatever, but just to actually hear what they sound like when I stop, what I say, was I right? Is it better?
Right.
So I'm a huge fan of just that. The audio, there's a focus to
which
audio.
Kind of getting back to the practice makes me think of another thing that Levinson told me to do when I was a student in terms of practicing. He said, Joel, you should never look at your left hand. You can look at the bow, but never look at the left hand. That's just like a cardinal sin. And what you should really be doing is go into the practice room, cover the window that may be on the door with paper, turn the light off, get one of those like blindfolds that people use to sleep on the plane, and just make it so it's pitch dark, and then practice. Because really all you're doing when you're playing is you're trying to link your sense of touch with your sense of hearing. Like the visual has nothing to do with it, more or less. You need it to read the music, but you should memorize anything anyway. But that's another thing where it's just like shutting off one of your senses. Let's say the visual sense is really kind of opens up your other senses, right? Right. And especially since, what we do professionally is all about our oral skills, then it just makes sense that, something like a podcast or listening back an audio recording as opposed to video or whatever will just give you different types of information and make your brain alter how it's thinking and the different neuron connections and everything.
The switching cost is something I think about a lot. Like anytime you get switched from task to task, you lose like time getting reoriented. And so these days I try to just work on, rather than I'm going to do a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, I'm like, I'll spend 3 hours in Pomodoros with breaks working on one project so I can like really sink into that project. Then maybe go to lunch and work on something entirely differently. Right. And like and then like other studies I've read, like when you get interrupted at work, how long does it take you to get back into that groove? Right.
Although there are also studies, and this was in the Learning How to Learn course, where if you're toggling between subjects in a way that you intend to do, by giving, let's say like you practice for 25 minutes. And let's say you're trying to balance like solo music and orchestral music. Okay. If you do like, let's say 3 Pomodoros of the solo music in a row, or if you do 3 Pomodoros and you do the solo music, then orchestral, then solo again, by toggling, you're giving your brain time to subconsciously process what you had already done.
So like while you're training.
Yeah, it's like the gym. Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Wow.
So that's another component where it's like you actually kind of want to a certain degree to change things up.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Like if the worst thing you could possibly do is like, let's say you need to practice Bottesini or something like that. Yeah. Go into the practice room for 5 hours and only practice Bottesini.
Right.
And talk to me afterwards. That's the worst possible thing you could do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But so that's why just variety and kind of being able to toggle back and forth, give your brain time to subconsciously process things while you're doing something else, come back to it later on, is a excellent way of just kind of dealing with how you need to do things, right?
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. When you pull the string through the peg, twist it around itself a few times before continuing to wind. This pulls more of the string through the peg neatly, and it decreases the likelihood of the string falling out of tension. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Texas Hill Country Bass Collective. Join them July 22nd through July 25th for their 6th annual Austin Bass Workshop. Come join friends from the area for 4 days of music, bass, and fun, and work with 2019 featured guest artist and former podcast guest Dennis Whitaker. Learn more at TexasHillCountryBassCollective.com.
I've been using Duolingo to learn Spanish. My Spanish is horrible, but it's better than it was. 200, I think I'm day 230 or something. So, and I've been thinking a lot about how that program, which has got a huge user base and sort of the users feed the machine of like what is most effective. Just looking at how it balances repetition with variety. And now you say something. Now you translate to English. Now you write down what you hear in Spanish. Now you pick letter. You know. Now and I've thought a lot about how that parallels between that and practice.
The other thing that does is like a spaced repetition. Do you know that spaced repetition?
But tell they might not.
Okay, so spaced repetition is a way to memorize things better, right? So especially good for language learning or really anything you need to do. So the way that it works is that there's a falling off curve. If you needed, let's say you needed to learn a word in Spanish, and I tell you the word in Spanish, and you repeat it to yourself, you'll remember it for maybe 30 seconds, but then you'll forget it. So the trick is you remind yourself about what you already learned right at the moment where you're about to forget it. And every time you do that, the spacing gets more. So let's say you learn a word, 30 seconds later you remind yourself about it. 2 minutes later you remind yourself about it. 5 minutes later, etc. So you've learned that word for that day. Then the next time you remind yourself about the word is the following day. The next time you review the word is 3 days from then 7 days, then 21 days, etc. And every time you do that, it just gets like nailed deeper into your brain.
So how do you apply that to practicing? Or have you?
I've been thinking about that. I mean, I think that one way you can do it is like, let's take like an orchestral audition, right?
Okay.
So that you don't get stale. It's so easy to get stale on the excerpts, right?
Right.
But if you're preparing in a way where you do like a run through or whatever you're going to do, if you kind of try to do that where you're not hitting absolutely everything every single day, but you're giving yourself time in between, that may be a way to kind of organize things, because it's also so hard to practice everything you need to do on a list every day, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's a way of both organizing your practice time and, so maybe you don't need to practice as much.
Or for those of us who just don't get
exactly.
as much as we used to.
Right. I don't know. I think it's a complicated thing, but I've been thinking about how you can use these different things to organize your practicing, right?
Well, please publish your findings.
Okay, I'll try. I mean, the other thing is like if you're trying to memorize a piece, right? Let's say if you memorize one page, then the next day you're actively trying to memorize the second page and you review your memorization of the first page. Then the third day, you're actively memorizing a new page. You review the first 2 pages, etc., something like that. Because I know a lot of students have trouble. I personally have been like lucky where I just kind of memorize things easier than most people, it seems. But a lot of people ask me like, how can I memorize things? Like it's, they want to be able to do that. Maybe that's one way you could do it. I don't know.
It's interesting. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of practicing. One thing that going back to that app, Modacity, they have a streak. Like every day you practice with the app, and then you break your streak, and you don't want to break your streak, right? Because I'm on an 8-day streak.
Right.
Oh, like Duolingo with their streak, and that has made me practice certain days. Where we're live, so people walk by. That's made me practice certain days where I would not have pulled the bass out because I don't want to break my streak. So,
right. Yeah. Exactly. I also have a Streaks app. You're just using one app. I have like 7 apps.
Oh, you got a Streaks app too.
Yeah, you're way better than I am. But it's interesting you talk about the Spanish, because the other thing that I've found for myself, and I think it's important for students too, is like if you're only thinking about the bass or only thinking about music, it's also not necessarily healthy, right? Like
What
you
are
need
you
to have,
talking about?
You
What?
need to have other like being able to like learn another language,
Yeah.
or like have something totally unrelated,
Right.
but that you can make correlations to,
Okay.
right? Is also really important, I think. Like for example, another thing about memory is that getting back to the visual nature of our brains, another really good way to memorize something is to convert it into a visual image. And the crazier the visual image, the more memorable. Okay? So like, there's like professional memorizing competitions, right? So people can memorize like the order of a 52 card shuffled deck, and they can, if you just tell them like, Jack of Hearts, maybe in the middle of the deck, they can either give you the order front, going forwards or backwards, right? Because they've put it in an order in their mind, and they've created visual images for each card.
It's like almost like I've heard the analogy of like it's like a house. You visualize a house, and there are
Exactly.
certain items. Those cards
Exactly.
are sitting in different areas of
Exactly. So it's like if you're turning things into visual images, right? Then you're just memorizing them more, right? Or they're easier to remember.
Yeah.
Right? So in terms of music, I've heard it said that like if you can try to visualize the layout of the page and also visualize yourself playing, right? You're actually going to be able to remember it more. It's as if you physically practiced it when you didn't, just by visualizing it,
Wow.
right?
It's interesting. Thinking about getting out of the music bubble and finding interdisciplinary things to do. There's something that happens in both of your cities, which check it out if you haven't before. It's called Creative Mornings, and once a month on Friday morning, which may conflict with things, but may not. I think 180 cities around the world it's like a mini TED Talk for creatives, for writers, for musicians, although I'm one of the few musicians. It's usually like tech people in San Francisco where I live. But I go to that every chance I get because it's so great and some tech company sponsors it, and there's free breakfast and coffee, so that's great if for no other reason. But I find it so interesting to get out and be around graphic designers and writers, and then every speaker draws kind of a different crowd, and everybody's there. It's like nerds forcing themselves to be social, too, which is a great moment. Like everybody's like, "How's it going?" You can tell that they sit in front of a computer all day, but that's kind of part of the thing. Is like they have all these games to make you be friendly, and
That's awesome.
I totally love it because it energizes me and it makes me think about just arts in a different way and the creative process in a different way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you have any hobbies?
I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that specific thing, but now that you said there's free breakfast at them, I think a lot of musicians will be showing up.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Free food. Free food.
We do respond to certain things.
Yeah. So he's learning Spanish. Do you have any hobbies you're doing?
Oh, I wish I had a large list. Honestly, just being a dad right now is a pretty creative hobby. For one of the things I do is storytelling, which I just started with my daughter, and by the time I think when she turned 2 or so, she started telling stories back too. But what's interesting to me about that, it's sort of a memory thing and it's sort of like composition, but you're doing it with stories. So I always use the same characters.
That's awesome.
Or I have this cast of characters, and I just did it for fun and to entertain her and keep her involved or put her asleep. But I haven't had any chance to write music or anything like that recently, but that's one of my creative outlets, and now she does it with me, which is a lot of fun.
That reminds me.
Yes.
Tying into the Spanish thing. So like it comes from Latin, right? But the word in Spanish for create is crear, right? Mm-hmm. Criar comes from the same Latin root, but criar is like you can criar a un niño, right? Like you can raise a child.
Okay.
But it's the same Latin root, which basically means to help grow.
Okay.
So if you're a creative person, you're helping your work to grow, or you're creating something, right?
Huh.
But at the same time, you could think of like raising a child or like teaching a student as a creative act because you're helping it to grow, right?
And that's what
amazing.
it feels like when you're doing, when you're fully involved in doing it too. So it's not just like, checking something off your list, but like getting in there, getting down on the floor and playing with somebody, or really so for me that's fun. That's a big part of my life right now, and
I agree.
Even though when we're talking about all the music stuff and I'm saying I barely have time to practice, but I'm definitely doing stuff too. It just.
And there are different phases of life and chapters in life,
Right.
like how, and then kids grow up. And I don't have kids. I don't know if I'll ever have that chapter, but we'll see. But it's interesting.
Well, even you've taught so many students over the years, right?
Right.
Yeah, they're my quasi kids.
Yeah,
and a lot of them are
exactly.
here. It's you
Exactly.
both,
That's
had
awesome.
that experience too, right? Like
Right.
running it. Like I love the experience of having these students that I private taught in Metro Chicago that have then gone on, and some of them studied with David Allen Moore and Paul Ellison, different places, and they come back and I start talking with them, and I'm like taking notes,
Right, exactly.
Right.
and it's just that's such a fun experience to be on the journey with those
Right.
people. Those obviously different with your own children.
But that's
Right.
part of the reason that ISB conventions can feel like family reunions too, because you have the different generations of.
Yeah.
I have people who studied with me here, but my first teacher who I started studying with when I was 12 is at this convention too. And
Who I
have-
just interviewed for the podcast.
Oh, you did?
which is
Great. Mike Trowbridge.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's it's just great to have and to see different people's influence like pass on. For instance, Sam Suggs, who when was he played his big recital
in 2017
at that one, and I've already talked to 2 or 3 people who I heard talking to him and saying, "Man, that recital like changed my life," and they're already taking bits of his kind of writing or his style and incorporating that into theirs. So it's like things move fast, but it's just fun to be around this many people who are
Yep.
interconnected and supportive of each other.
Yep, and such a variety of interests and styles and backgrounds and
Yep. Exactly.
yeah.
Something we can't replicate on our rectangles that we carry in our pockets all the time. Not yet, anyway. So
Let's hope we don't, because
Let's hope we
Well,
don't.
I
the,
want this
the
to
great
be
thing
fun.
about this is that it's not. There's no algorithm that's curating who's going to show up in front of you.
Right.
Right. It's just
It's good.
you
That's a
don't
good
know who
point.
may be passing by you, who you may have not seen in years, or who you don't even know, but knows someone else that you know. That
Right.
an algorithm is not going to do that for you. You're not just getting fed what you like. Mm-hmm. So it's more real, right?
Exactly.
Well, speaking of the convention, I want to be respectful of your time, both of you. But I'll just say, this is the exact sort of episode I love to have. We sat down, you two were already chatting. We had no idea what we were going to talk about, and this is like my favorite type of conversation.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah,
like
well-
3 people talking about stuff that I find endlessly interesting. And so let's do this much more. And Jeremy, it's so great to have you.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing this,
Better
Jason.
fidelity.
My voice sounds much better, I'm sure.
Joel and Jeremy, thank you so much for chatting. I'll link up to everything in the show notes so you can learn more about them, Joel's new job, what Jeremy's up to, the San Diego Symphony, Jeremy's teaching. And I really hope you enjoyed this. I love conversations like this, impromptu conversations, chats with old friends about things that we're thinking about. And I dug it, and I'm sure, or I hope you did as well. And if you want to reach out and suggest more conversations like this, or topics or guests or what have you, feedback at contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me, and I'd love to hear from you. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and award-winning bass maker Mitch Mooring. Learn more about his work and his beautiful basses at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper of the Backstage Creative Podcast for all her hard work behind the scenes, cataloging and archiving everything we talk about on the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.